All right, I can say okay on it. So what do you think? You want to wait a minute or two, or you?
I've got a few slides to go through, so I say let's get started. I'm not called Dr. P for nothing.
That's right. He has lots. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and our director of the Center for Applied Imagination and department chair for the Department of Creativity and Change Leadership, Dr. Gearard Puccio, who reminded me that I'm like just a couple months older than him. So he's always saying,
You're older than
it's
me.
yeah, I'm always you always saying, but it's been a long run, and Gearard has enormous amount of experience as a scholar, as a researcher, as a administrator in creativity, and as a colleague. So I'm really pleased that he continues to hold all those balls up in the air at the same time and keep the energy going here at the center. So welcome, Gearard. I'm really glad that you're doing this mini C, and it's particularly on Foresight, which is very exciting and continues to be great work.
Well, thank you, Sue. I appreciate it. Thanks for the lovely introduction. I'd like to think I can keep a lot of balls in the air, but as I looked at the 99 names that joined us and signed up through Eventbrite, I see many of you out there. I still owe email messages to. I apologize. I will get to you. I promise I will get to you. So great to have you all here as our final mini C. I think our mini C, which stands for Mini Creativity Expert Exchanges, have gone extremely well. This year, each one has sold out. Can you sell out a free event? They've been fully subscribed, which is just delightful to see, and I'm proud to be the cleanup hitter for this pilot year trying out our mini C. And the reason why they're called mini C, Mini Creativity Expert Exchange, is that in March we do our annual Creativity Expert Exchange over 2 days, and with these shorter 1 hour sessions, and we're doing a little bit of an experiment to try a different time. All the previous mini Creativity Expert Exchanges ran from noon to 1 New York East Coast time. This one, of course, at a different time in the evening, just to see how we might do in terms of attracting other folks to join us. So if you would, it is interesting to know where you're coming in from and what your connection is to the department, because all of that, of course, gets downloaded after our session. So the topic for this evening is creative problem solving, and specifically creative problem solving at work. I'm delighted to present this mini C during World Creativity and Innovation Week. As Marcy Siegel, an alumnus of our program and an Alumni Achievement Award winner, who was one of the major proponents behind the creation of World Creativity and Innovation Week, which was endorsed by the United Nations, as she said in a Creativity Expert Exchange conference back in 2017, when our department, our Center for Applied Imagination, turned 50 years old. She began her C speech by saying, "We have a day. Actually, we have a whole week," and I'm particularly proud to represent my colleagues at the Center for Applied Imagination during this very important week. So here's the flow to the mini C presentation this evening. I'll give you a little bit of context. I think in looking over the names, while I saw many names that I recognize, I did see many names that I did not recognize, and we are recording this, so there will be others who will view this who may not know much about the Center for Applied Imagination. I think context is extremely important to really grasp ideas and what's being communicated. In the spirit, again, of going over some basics, for some of you, this will be review, but a quick overview of the creative problem solving process that will lead into the main focus of my research, which has been looking at how we naturally engage. All of us have creative problem solving inside of us. All of us are creative problem solvers. All of us are wired to be creative problem solvers, but not all in the same way. And so I have developed, and I work with partners at Foresight to make available a self-report measure that identifies individuals' preferences within our innate creative problem-solving process. And the focus of the presentation this evening, there's been lots of research on Foresight, is to look at how this relates to how we show up at work and how work makes demands on different ways of thinking. So I'll briefly look at some former research just to catch up those who haven't been introduced to Foresight before. I'll just mention a few studies, and then I'll get into the current study, and then Dr. David Yates will moderate some Q&A at the end of the presentation. So some fast facts about the Center for Applied Imagination. This graphic that you see in the background is a gentleman by the name of Alex Osborne. Alex Osborne was the visionary who helped to establish our department and our academic program in collaboration with and under the leadership of two faculty, Dr. Sidney Parnes and Dr. Ruth Noller. But Osborne really drove the vision. Osborne was an advertising executive, very successful. When he retired, he took the royalties from a book called Applied Imagination. In this book, he introduced something to the world, which has been well disseminated, often poorly applied, and that is the tool brainstorming. But his vision was bigger than a tool. His vision was to impact education, and he founded an organization called the Creative Education Foundation to do more within educational experiences to help promote imagination and apply deliberate creativity. That eventually led to the founding of our department at Buffalo State University in 1967. So we've been at this creativity business for a long time. We offered the world's first Master of Science degree in creativity, which began in the mid-1970s. More and more our curriculum, because we recognize that to drive change in the world and to respond successfully to change in the world requires two major skill sets: creative thinking and creative leadership. And so our graduate program has woven together these two very important forces for change, creativity and leadership. And we offer a SUNY Advanced Graduate Certificate in Creativity and Change Leadership. Our program is available both on campus and 100% online. We have a large community, and we are in the process of constructing, actually it's been constructed, it's under review, a doctoral program is under review with the State University of New York. So that's a little bit of context. So Osborne's focus was to provoke imagination and to move creativity from a chance occurrence to something that was more predictable. And he developed methods that were strategies like brainstorming, cognitive tools that could move creativity from a chance occurrence to a deliberate occurrence. And he's most well known for brainstorming, but he developed a systematic methodology he called creative problem solving, which can be likened to a toolbox for our minds, a toolbox that allows us to go into particular drawers within this toolbox and find strategies that will help us to better wrestle problems to the ground. To live, as J.P. Guilford said, is to have problems, and to solve problems creatively leads to growth. But when do we, although we are all innately creative, when do we get the opportunity in our educational experiences or professional experiences? When do we get the opportunity to learn strategies that help us to better respond to life's challenges or professional challenges? And so Osborne developed a methodology. What you see on the screen here is a streamlined version of the creative problem solving process, if you will, the foundational essential steps to the creative problem solving process, which are, let's clarify, hey, what's the problem we're working on? What's the challenge? Let's diagnose. Let's make sure we understand what the issues are that need to be resolved. Then we move into ideating, playing with possibilities. How do we respond to those challenges in creative ways? Then we shift into selecting and developing those options, those ideas that show promise, transforming them into robust solutions. And then creativity is more than dreaming of new possibilities, bringing those new possibilities to reality, to create. And so the final stage of the creative problem solving process is to implement. This is a toolbox. And over time, those who work in creative problem solving have designed tools, cognitive tools, repeatable tools that guide our thinking, that make creativity more predictable, more deliberate, enhances the probability of getting to a breakthrough. So this is why I refer to creative problem solving as a toolbox. Hey, but it's never been more important to have a fully stocked toolbox than today. Sue very kindly, when she introduced me, said, I forget the exact expression she used, but I have a lot of material or a strong background in creativity. It's because I've been at this for 4 decades. And in that span of time, I took my first creativity course, in fact, back in 1981. And as B. Parnes said, in those days, when you uttered the word creativity on campus, it was a dirty word. That's not the case anymore. Creativity has moved out of the shadows and into the spotlight. Not saying it's always well understood, but it is openly talked about as a 21st century skill. So this comes from the World Economic Forum, the top skills for the year 2025. Number 5, lower left-hand column, creativity, originality, initiative. There it is. Boom. We can all celebrate that. And isn't that a wonderful thing, especially during Creativity and Innovation Week? I would argue that creativity shows up. It's a red thread woven throughout these top 10 skills for success in the workplace. Look at number 1, analytical thinking and innovation. Go to the 10th right column, last item, reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. And I could pluck out other concepts that are in this array of skill sets that are influenced by or directly related to creativity. So we should celebrate that. It is in demand. And so creative problem solving, creative thinking is very much tied into professional and personal success. So we can learn to be more skillful by learning the tools in this toolbox. But in my research and the work that I do with my Foresight partners out of Evanston, Illinois, what we recognize is that we all have this inside of us already. And so by nature, we're hardwired to clarify, to ideate, to develop, and to implement. We have preferences for these 4 ways of thinking. And those preferences is a kind of diversity. We all recognize the importance of diversity. We tend to think about diversity as what you see, what's visible, race, ethnicity, gender. But I would argue there's another kind of diversity, and that is psychological diversity. And since creative problem solving is fundamental to our experience as humans, and as we are wired differently, I think another important form of diversity to pay attention to is how we differ in how we think and how we engage in this universal creative problem solving or creative process. So we have a measure that's called Foresight. I'm really wearing 2 hats today. You can't see it, but I have 2 hats on. One hat is my hat as a distinguished professor and chair of the Center for Applied Imagination. That's my academic hat. And on the other side, I have a hat that's labeled Foresight, which is a company out of Evanston, Illinois, that has made available this tool, Foresight, to the world. Think about it as university transfer of knowledge into a commercial venture. So I'm wearing those two hats. So Foresight, for those who aren't aware, Foresight is a psychological measure. It's a 36 item self-report that has been developed over decades. It measures 4 preferences, so it has 4 scales: clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. And for those who might be interested in the psychometrics of this tool, it holds up. It's a very reliable measure with Cronbach alphas, meaning how reliable, how consistent are these scales of 0.70 or greater. So let's look at, for those of you familiar, this will be a quick review. For those of you that are new to Foresight, what does it mean to be a clarifier? What is it like to have a clarified preference? These are individuals who like to focus on the problem, to do their homework, to do their research, to develop a clear understanding of what is reality. They therefore like to look at the details. They tend not to be too quick to move to solutions. They want to make sure that the right problem is being addressed. And if you take any of these ways of thinking and you get stuck in that particular gear, so to speak, there can be a downside. And the potential downside to clarifying too much is analysis paralysis, overanalysis. The ideate preference, so for individuals who have a bent towards ideation, these are dreamers, big picture thinkers, people who tend to think in global terms, love to play with possibilities. They tend to be more intuitive, making random associations, bringing distinct ideas together into a new amalgamation. And if you take this form of thought, this playful, fluent way of thinking, divergent way of thinking too far, if that's all your mind ever did, the potential risk is getting stuck thinking in very global, abstract terms and not being able to focus in on the details. Next, we have develop. So someone with a develop preference is an analytical thinker. They will get very focused on one concept or idea or solution or option and will work to perfect it. Able to see the strengths and the weaknesses, the pluses and the minuses, enjoy comparing competing solutions to analyze which ones will be most productive. They enjoy thinking about and crafting ideas to make ideas workable. They can be planful in terms of what needs to be done to carry an idea forward, but they might stop there because their potential liability is they may get stuck perfecting. They always see a way to make things better. The kind of person who is doing a presentation on Thursday night and up until 10 minutes before the presentation, they're still tweaking the PowerPoint. Am I talking about myself? I might be. Then you have a fourth preference. This is the implement. This is bringing ideas to the world. It's pushing them out. It's getting into action. It's giving structure to ideas. It's bringing them to fruition. The old Nike slogan of just do it. It's leaping to action. The potential liability there is that sometimes someone who has this bent towards implementation may leap to action too quickly, might overlook something. The pie may not be fully baked. And then there are individuals who have equal distribution of energy across all 4 of these ways of thinking, these 4 forms of creative cognition. We call that person the integrator. They've got some unique qualities. Someone who is an integrator can, of course, move flexibly between, across these four ways of thinking, highly malleable in their thought processes. But what is unique to an integrator is because they don't have peaks or valleys, great disparities in their energy for these four preferences, they find it very easy to relate to the other or all four preferences, individuals who might show a preference in any one of the other four areas. So therefore, relationship is important to them. They focus on group harmony. They can plug places within the process and teams that might have gaps. Potential liability might say, "Oh, that's great. That's a perfect profile to have." But potential liability on occasion for those who have this integrator preference is that they can be pleasers and they might not let their voices be heard. So that's the theory. That's the background. Let's get into the research. So what do we know? Well, what do we know? Just quickly going over some of the past research. And I'm not sure he's here, but he had signed up for this workshop. Russ Wheeler, former graduate student, did his thesis on, so we have these tendencies, we have these preferences. I wonder if individuals with different creative problem solving preferences respond differently to creative problem solving training. And indeed, that's what we found. So we found that some trainees say they enjoy learning the tools that match their strong preferences. So if you're a high ideator, you might enjoy learning ideational tools, but what you find most valuable after training are the tools that align with your lower preferences, which is kind of cool. So people are filling up their toolboxes by recognizing, oh, this is outside of what comes most naturally to me. This is outside of where my energy is. A low clarifier. So going through the training, and they weren't doing this intentionally, we didn't tell this was all psychology, but just by nature, they recognized and found greater value in tools that were outside of their preferences. So neat study. Foresight and well-being, more and more creativity is getting connected to well-being, and rightfully so. A number of years ago, Pam Zillet, Selchuk Akar, and Amber Boyer, and I did a research study looking at foresight and its relationship to dimensions of well-being. Just to highlight a few of those, we found a very strong relationship between clarifiers, or the clarifying preference, and premeditation, getting caught up in premeditative thought before engaging in something, an activity, an experience. Clarifiers, or people with high clarifying preferences, will tend to mull things over, which can be great unless you get stuck there. Ideators have a tendency to be sensation seekers, seeking novelty and getting a real emotional buzz from novelty. Developers have they lean towards obsessive compulsive disorder. Implementers show low anxiety. I mean, that might sound positive, but the challenge there, speaking from experience, revealing my other high preference, is that sometimes there's value in being a bit anxious because it might help you to anticipate something that you should prepare for. So interesting connections between foresight and well-being. Speaking of well-being, recent research study by Dr. Nagma Khan, who works as a physician in a hospital in Atlanta. She was curious whether there was a relationship between foresight and emergency room physicians' burnout, and found that among the variables that she collected in her research study, the strongest relationship to burnout wasn't hours worked per week, it wasn't years of service, it wasn't debt, wasn't number of children. Those things did contribute to burnout, but the strongest predictors of burnout was mindset, your creative mindset, how you experience the world, how you perceive the world, how you engage with the world through creative cognition. And here she found high clarifying preferences. Physicians with high clarifying preferences reported greater burnout, where high ideating preferences reported lower burnout, especially around this concept of finding personal meaning in work. which serves to as a buttress to burnout. So that's some past research. Let's get into this evening's research. So earlier I shared with you that we should all celebrate. This is World Creativity and Innovation Week. We should celebrate the fact that finally Osborne, 70 some years ago, was making an argument for creativity as a fundamental workplace skill, and that in education and training, we needed to do more to prepare people with this skill rather than robbing them of this skill, their imagination. But here's the question. If creative thinking is an in-demand 21st century workplace skill, do creative problem-solving preferences vary across occupations? Do these four preferences of clarifying, ideating, developing, and implementing, we talk about creative thinking as being a 21st century skill, but creative thinking is a complex, higher order skill, which means it's composed of sub-skills or sub-preferences in this case, because we're looking at cognitive style and these preferences. So since it is a complex form of thinking, is it true to assume that these, using the fundamental stages of the creative process as outlined by Foresight, is it true to say that they're equally demanded in various occupations? So this is what we examined thanks to the team at Foresight. We have several 100,000 people who've completed Foresight. When individuals complete Foresight, they're invited to participate in our research. And this analysis is of individuals, over 16,000, who shared with us voluntarily their occupation and agreed to allow us to use their information, anonymous information, to examine whether there are some systematic relationships. So this is a list of the 15 occupations we looked at. In case there's any statisticians out there, grab a screenshot of this, because I'm not going to go over it. My experience is for most, numbers can be overwhelming, but this is the analysis of the clarifying preference and its relationship to occupation. If you want to look at this later, this is the analysis of the ideating preference. This is the analysis of the developing preference. This is the analysis of the implementer preference. Okay, I'm going to show you graphics. I find that's the best way to represent statistical output. So when we look at the 15 occupations and we graph whether it's a high or low preference for clarify, you can see in this graph there are some pretty high peaks and some pretty low valleys when it comes to clarifying. So the peaks represent occupations where we find a preponderance of people who show a high preference for clarifying. Whereas where you see the dips, the valleys here, that's where we find individuals who report a lower preference for clarify. And so just to highlight some of these, I've entered this into the slide. So it's kind of interesting, and it would seem theoretically in keeping with Foresight theory that in finance, quality, operations, information technology, engineering, purchasing, customer relations, management, we find more individuals in those professions who have a high preference for clarifying. Kind of makes sense because there's a lot of detail in these particular professions. When we move to ideating, a different set of occupations, interestingly, bubble up to the top. So again, if we look at this graph, at the bottom we have low preferences, at the top we have high preferences. Where we see the peaks of the mountains, that would indicate a high preference for ideating. Where we see the valleys, those are low preferences. And here, consulting, advertising, design, and research and development stand out as having significantly higher ideating preferences. When we go to the developing preference, again, same structure. The peaks of the mountains show high preference. The lower end of this plot, the valleys show low preferences for developing. And we see information technology, engineering, purchasing, customer relations management. Those all show up as having high developing preferences. And then finally, when we go to implement, we see operations and sales really standing out as having high preferences for implement. So what's interesting about this is, wow, creativity, creative cognition, creative problem solving are considered 21st century skills. But when we break that down, we take that complex form of thinking, we break it down into these 4 basic ways of engaging in the creative process: spending time clarifying, doing our research, analyzing the current reality, ideating, playing with possibilities, developing and refining solutions, perfecting good ideas into great solutions, and then moving our ideas out into the world and implementing. Yes, people show different preferences, and it seems that occupations pull on have different cognitive demands. So when we say creative problem solving and creativity are in demand 21st century skills, we should follow that up by then saying, and in particular occupations, there are specific forms of creative cognition that are in demand. So that leads us to job fit. And one of the questions that is asked in the demographic element of the foresight measure, so when someone goes in to complete foresight and they agree to participate in our research, they're asked the question, how well suited do you feel you are for your job right now? And people indicate whether they're not a well fit or have somewhat of a well fit, whether they're well suited. I should say, let me back up. Individuals indicate whether they're suited, that's the expression that we use for their work. At the high end, they are able to select well, very well suited, or somewhat well suited. So they have 3 levels of choice. As they judge how well suited they are, this really represents within person job fit. There are 2 forms of fit in terms of our work. One is the abilities that we bring to work and the abilities and skills that are demanded by work. So if you need to keyboard at work and your work demands that you keyboard 60 words a minute and you can keyboard 80 words a minute, that's a good fit. Actually, in some ways, you're overskilled. But if you're required to keyboard 60 words a minute and you have the ability to keyboard 20 words a minute, that's a poor fit. And that would lead to certain implications. When we take foresight, we're looking at a second kind of fit, and that's your preference. And there's a theory within psychology, person job fit, that our personalities also blend with our work and that our jobs will demand certain things of us as we are wired as people, how we show up. And so it's predicted, whether it's ability or preference. If you have a high fit with work, you'll have greater satisfaction, higher performance, increased well-being at work. So we pose this question to our respondents and we ask them, are you not well suited / somewhat well suited for work, well suited, or very well suited for work? And when we plot that against their clarifying preferences, we see a very clear pattern here that individuals who have high clarifying preferences say they're very well suited for work. Well, guess what? We see the same pattern for all four scales. So for ideating, the higher the ideating preference, the more likely you are to say, I'm very well suited for work. Same thing for developing, again, moving across the x-axis here, individuals who say they're not well suited or somewhat well suited have a lower developing preference, pretty much the same level of preference for well suited, but it shoots up when people say they're very well suited. They also have a higher developer preference, and we see the same pattern for implementer. Hey, not a surprise, because the World Economic Forum says creative thinking is an essential workplace skill. So people who are high in all four preferences say they're well suited for work. That kind of makes sense. However, when we go into occupations, does it make a difference? Is there an interaction between the occupation you're in and your foresight profile? Does that interplay between your occupation and your preferences predict how well suited you believe you are for your particular job? And this is anyone who came to my November Foresight U presentation, this is now the new analysis, the new information. So we took Foresight single preference profiles, and you can see them on the left there. This is what the graphic looks like when we plot people's Foresight profiles. So high clarifying, high ideating, high developing, high implementing, all stacked there in a row. We took individuals who reported high preferences in each of these areas, and we crossed it by occupation. We found more than 25 job fit interactions. That means a particular interplay between someone's profile and how it impacted or how it showed up in terms of whether they said they were well suited for their work. So for example, I'm going to give you examples in each of the four areas: ideating, excuse me, I'll start with ideating, I'll go to developing, then implementing, and I'll end up with clarifying. So in advertising, for example, people who show up as high ideating in advertising reported significantly greater fit. They were much more likely to say they were well suited for their job in advertising than people with high ideating preferences in finance, operations, marketing, design, IT, engineering, and sales. Let me say this the opposite way. So individuals who are high ideating preference in finance, operations, marketing, design, IT, engineering, and sales were less likely to feel or report that they were well suited for those occupations than high ideators in advertising. That's kind of interesting, because we saw earlier, when we look at all occupations and we just generically look at people who report feeling well suited, we saw this pattern that high preferences always resulted in people responding, saying that they were well suited for their work. But now we see a nuanced relationship here, that there's this, what is called in statistics, this interaction effect. So people who are high ideating in advertising seem to know or recognize implicitly that they have a good fit with their work. When looking at developing, that developing preference, so tweaking, refining, perfecting, taking an idea or concept and really throwing energy into crafting it, we see high developing in design shows a greater fit than 6 other occupations: high developing in finance, operations, IT, R&D, engineering, and sales. So think about all the time that's spent prototyping in design, refining ideas, and and perfect them. And it kind of makes sense that they would feel that they're better suited. They're more likely to say they're well suited for their occupation. This is interesting. Sales, right? Go get her done. So high implementing in sales. So those individuals with high implementing preferences in sales are significantly more likely to report feeling well suited, very well suited for sales than individuals who are high implementers in 8 other occupations: finance, quality, operations, marketing, design, IT, R&D, and communication. So we're not all having the same experience. What I'm saying is that how we engage in creative cognition and the demands of our workplace, or the provisions in terms of our workplace, in terms of the kind of thinking that's necessary, that dominates that particular occupation, we're having different experiences. This one I need to think through. High clarifying showed only a couple significant effects when we compared occupations. High clarifying advertising, those who are high clarifying and advertising reported greater fit than high clarifying in operations, and high clarifying in R&D reported a greater fit than those with high clarifying in operations as well, but only a couple, as opposed to the other 3, ideating, developing, and implementing, showed differences in terms of clarifying. So what does this mean? I'm going to open it up for questions in a moment, but I'll give you a little bit of my interpretation. So when we look at creative problem solving at work, we can start to maybe think about costs and benefits of the cognitive demand placed on us at work. And so more and more work is about how we think and manage information. Even if you work in manufacturing, it's less about brute force and strength, and it's much more about how we solve complex problems. And so that shines even a stronger light on the importance of understanding cognitive preferences at work, because so much of our success at work relies on how we perceive and think through information and data. And so foresight helps to reveal our cognitive preferences, our creative cognition. And it reveals for us the demands that certain jobs make on different forms of cognition, which leads me to think, well, maybe there are costs and benefits of this interaction, right? That salesperson who is a high implementer is finding they're very well suited at work, but someone who might be a high implementer in finance is having a very different experience, because there are different cognitive demands that are being placed on that individual. So that leads to implications in terms of training, right? How do we increase our bandwidth in areas within the creative process? Well, we know creative problem solving training helps to build up our creative muscle. Career management, thinking about how we fit in our present occupation and thinking about what we might want to transition into next, by thinking about the kind of demands that we're experiencing now versus what we want to experience going forward. So it gives me pause in terms of the implications of vocational choice. So I'm going to open it up to questions in a moment, but I do want to emphasize that I'm not just representing my thinking here. I want to express my gratitude to my Foresight partners for the fine work that they do in terms of making Foresight as a tool available to the world. Without them, we wouldn't have this massive database to play with and develop these deeper insights into creative problem solving preferences. and my academic colleagues, especially Shiva Jahani at the University of Central Florida, the statistician that I work with, who brings that expertise to bear on this very large data set, and my colleagues, of course, at the Center for Applied Imagination. And so, David, I've got 6:48 here in New York time. I've got a few other slides that I'll close with, but how about if we see if there are any questions out there?
Okay, George, none in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, but everybody's probably processing all of the all the information that you shared.
Or you all need to wake up. If I cured your insomnia, at least I was being helpful in that regard. I will entertain questions if folks want to raise their digital hand, or David, if you have a particular recommendation. Oh, I see Chris, your hand went up. Long time no see, Chris.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Puccio, for today. My question is, I'm curious, have you seen research across different generations? This is something I've been listening to with podcasts, and I'm just curious, have you seen these creative problem-solving preferences across different generations? Or do different generations lead to more
Yeah,
or different preference
good
than others?
question.
Yeah.
Good question. So, working with Dr. Jahani, we did look at age because that's one of the pieces of demographic information, and there's no correlation. It's pretty
Okay.
much zero correlation. So there's no relationship with age, which is really interesting then when you start to think about occupations. So something as fundamental as age, we might assume that, well, as you get older, or individuals who are older might report lower ideating preference. That's not the case.
Right. Yeah.
It's zero
That's what I was thinking,
correlation,
yeah.
which makes it even more impressive as we move in and out of occupations to see these things shifting. Again, I can't emphasize enough this construct of cognitive demand. In person job fit, there's this theory that we are attracted to occupations. We just have this implicit knowing, intuitive sense that we're attracted to. Maybe we discovered it when we were children, the kinds of things that we're attracted to, and maybe that's driven by our forms of thought and our preferences. So we're attracted to certain occupations, we're selected by those occupations, which then creates more homogeneity, more of a cognitive profile in a particular occupation. And this is research that I'd love to do then. If there's not a fit, attrition from, we pull out of that, we go find something else. So no relationship with age.
Right. Thank you.
Sarah Thurber, Foresight Partner.
Hey, thank you, Gearard. It's always such a pleasure to hear what you're thinking about and what you're working on, and sort of the knowledge that you have an amazing ability to tease out of things. My question is really about using a tool like Foresight as a job selection tool. Like, we have always discouraged people from using this as a tool for hiring and for primary selection. Does your new research change your mind about that?
I hadn't thought about that. And now that you put me on the spot in front of lots of people,
Good of me, sorry.
yeah, no, what I will say for sure is I think in terms of career management, right? So lots of corporations, I remember when I was offered a job working with Procter and Gamble, they had like the first 10 years of my career planned out. I think for a career planning tool, Foresight could be really valuable. So besides, what your degree's in and what experiences you've had, I think Foresight and other tools could be really useful for thinking about the next step, the next phase of your career, to ensure that there's a better than chance prediction that there's going to be a good fit in that next step. So that 100%, Sarah, I would say I would throw my support behind. hiring processes, it depends on how it's done. If it's used as part of the process and it's one data point and not the only thing that's focused on because people are so complex and it's a two-way relationship and a two-way dialogue. Yeah, maybe, but I think it has to be used carefully. So yeah. Sarah, do you
Well,
have an opinion? So
yeah, well,
you
I
asked
will
me,
say-
you're the Foresight managing partner.
No, I mean, I think about it all the time and we get that question a lot. And I just, we are a research-based company, so this is new research and I want to make sure we incorporate it in a meaningful way. What I know we do is suggest that people who are hiring and writing job descriptions really articulate the kind of thinking the job is likely to require, because people tend to recognize that and self-select. And then I think you sort of put the power in the hands of the people. That seems like maybe the better place to put it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and I think that comports with what I was saying about cognitive demand. So thinking about that when writing a job description, will telegraph to perspective. We're saying creative problem solving is a fundamental workplace skill. Thinking about the creative cognition that's demanded by that job and telegraphing that to prospective candidates could lead to a greater fit, right? Because individuals can self-select, and then also through the interviewing process, it could be part of the dialogue. Are you comfortable with these things? Or, let's talk about the kinds of problems you're going to solve and the kinds of thinking that'll be required in this particular job. That could be much more part of the dialogue that happens in the selection process. So using the Foresight theory. Yeah. I see, Marisha, you have your hand up. Great to see you. Long time no see, stranger.
Hello, hello. I was just going to contribute to this conversation because in two different instances, I do have clients who use the Foresight as a part of hiring process.
Great.
And the criteria is everybody in the organization has done it. So they've seen their profile. So they are looking for, in the different roles, some cognitive balance, I will say, thinking, cognitive balance. And so, but I'm happy to hear what you said about how it should be used, because that's what I put in the criteria of how they use it, that they must share it with the candidate. And that it's meant to open up dialogue and ask better questions and be engaged with the candidate, because then the candidate can choose better too. So it's not just a one-way stream. And so far they have promised me that's the way they're using it. And I always make it very, very clear, this is not meant to be a thumbs up, thumbs down on the candidate. It's a gift to the candidate that they would then learn this information.
Yeah, no, I really like that positioning. Yeah, it's a dialogue, it's a process. Yeah, makes
Good. I'm
total
glad you
sense.
say that, because
Man,
if
thanks
you
for
felt
chiming in.
otherwise, if you felt otherwise, I'd want to know. Because I wouldn't
No,
want to.
I like that. I
Okay,
like
great.
that.
Thank you very much for the feedback.
Yeah, no, thanks for jumping in. So David,
George?
Dr. Yates, I know you have a graduate course actually in this Zoom room at 7 o'clock New York time. So I'm going to jump to closing slides. Is that okay?
Yes, and I will forward to you the text. Two participants have asked questions in the chat now in the last few minutes. So I'll forward those to you so that you can respond to them. Okay, Gearard?
Sounds good. Thanks. So closing slides. Thank you everyone for joining. Few things. Foresight research invitation. Foresight is always interested in engaging others in research, and we love to fully support the use of Foresight. So some possible topics: long-term research, building from what I shared this evening. Long-term research looking at dropouts. So looking at those who enter, let's say, an engineering program or an MBA program or the military and then drop out. Is there a systematic preference, a particular bias towards a preference that removes themselves from particular environments? I just came off of a conference on neuroscience and creativity, and I'm really curious about eye tracking and how people look at information, and will it differ? Do you look at literally a screen and different places on the screen when you're reading a brief or looking at an image? Are there predictable differences between those with clarifying, ideating, developing, and implementing? My hypothesis is there are differences, and that gives us a view into how their brains are working. fMRI scans looking at blood flow in the brain, working on clarifying, ideating, developing, and implementing tasks. I'm curious to see if there are physiological differences. For anyone who's interested in becoming a certified Foresight user, it's rare that Dr. Blair Miller and I get to deliver a Foresight certification together. It's been quite a few years. In fact, it might have been pre-COVID. And I'm happy to say on June 20 and 21, we'll be co-delivering a Foresight certification in Buffalo. If you're interested, reach out to Christine, at Foresight. Go ahead and do a screen grab of that. And then there's no better time than now to upshift your creativity and to learn to think bigger. And there's no better graduate program than the one at the Center for Applied Imagination. And so we have a number of different offerings in creativity and change leadership. We offer a micro-credential, which is 2 graduate courses. Dr. David Yates, who's got that lovely background behind him, the universe behind his shoulders, is teaching the first of these 2 courses. And then that's the summer, and the second course at the beginning of fall. So within the next 6 months, you could have a micro-credential in creativity, applied creative thinking and problem solving. Of course, there's the advanced graduate certificate, which is 6 courses. The new cohort, next cohort of distance learners will be joining that graduate certificate this summer, and the Master of Science degree in creativity and change leadership, which is a total of 11 courses. If you have any questions about these or you're interested, there's the department's email, phone number, and then our website. So thank you for joining. I hope this was intellectually nourishing. I hope it stimulated some new ideas and thoughts for you. This is Creativity Innovation Week. So please continue to celebrate by promoting creativity and innovation around the world. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.